All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and I know it's getting a little bit late. We are on the last two speakers. As some of you know, I just finished 731 days of campaigning in the 2016 U.S. elections. And I did it as a transhumanist, and as we discussed the last 2 days, transhumanism is a field where you want to use science and technology to radically modify the human being and also to modify the human experience. But before I get into a little bit about that and talk about how transhumanism can apply to politics and also how it can abolish government, you have to take a step back and remember something, that as a species, we're really young. We're just, 150,000 years have we even been humans. The universe itself is almost 14 billion years old. So when you think of governance, you have to realize that it's going to change. It should change. It should evolve into something that's going to be dramatically different than what we have now. And I'm going to get into some of those possibilities as we move forward. But I think the biggest issue at hand is to step outside of your box and say, yes, we can move outside of it. We can take on blockchain technology. We can do things that would require no central leader. We can do things that might even incite revolution, but maybe revolution is a good thing. Maybe revolution is how better things are born. It's not something that I would normally speak about on the campaign trail, but since I'm not running for the presidency anymore, I can be a little bit more free and a little bit more open on what I want to say. But I do have some radical ideas as we look into the future, 20, 30, 40 years. And I can tell you, I don't know if democracy is going to survive. I'm not sure if it should survive. It doesn't mean other things are going to come into place that are necessarily better, but it's something that will probably happen just through the nature of technology, because more than anything else, it's really technology that's going to change why and how we live in the systems that we live in. More than anything else that I can think about, more than the human spirit, more than any kind of love or mammalian instincts, it's technology that will strictly change the way we live our lives here in the future. And that's because we're going to be examining life through many different types of realities. It could be virtual reality, it could be an augmented reality, it could be a reality where we're connected to the cloud and our intelligence is possibly 1,000 times more than it is now. So if it's 1,000 times more, does that mean democracy survives? Does that mean there are better systems to take on? But whatever happens, governance can be applied through these different types of technologies. In the last 2016 elections, you saw a lot of different types of politicians. This one you're looking at right now is Bernie Sanders. Of course, we saw Hillary and Trump, but there were 1,900 candidates like myself, only about 10 of which were visible. But some of them were beginning to experiment in the different ways that you can campaign, in the different ways that we might see government in the future. Bernie Sanders was the very first person to do it in virtual reality. While you can't see in virtual reality here without your special goggles on, if you go online and type this, Google it, you can watch Bernie Sanders speak in virtual reality, which is really interesting because you can actually go up to his notes and look what he's reading from his notes. Not something you can do in the real world. But the point is that lots of ways of campaigning are changing. In fact, so already we have different types of technologies out there like holographic imaging where candidates can show up anywhere. For example, I could be having a conversation or a debate with Hillary Clinton and asking how it feels to lose. This is the new kind of technology that's here. In fact, there are two companies right now in Washington, D.C. that are offering this holographic technology in order so that you can campaign places where you aren't. Why should, I'm really happy I actually came to Korea to give my talk and to moderate the panel yesterday, but you probably, had we had the technology, it cost about $70,000, I could have done a holographic image and you could have seen me here. And there's also times when you can actually start debating with these images, and in the future, you can rest assured that it's not just going to be one candidate on one campaign trail, it's going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of candidates through different types of imaging, through different types of augmented realities, through different types of virtual realities, campaigning all at once, because why have one of you when you can have 1,000 of you? And the same thing is going to go for driverless cars. There will be, in 2020, driverless buses. And somebody like Trump, who's incredibly wealthy, is probably going to hire 1,000 buses, and they're going to drive themselves around the country. And this is definitely an unfair advantage for those who are going to be wealthy because, if you have enough money, I guess you can do enough advertising, and advertising can help you win, especially if in every city in downtown traffic, you have these giant buses that say Trump on the side of it. But it's just the nature of campaigning, as well as the nature of government, is going to be changing. In fact, I have an article coming out, I think next week in New Scientist, that talks about the possibility that within 10 years, maybe not 10 years, I'm being optimistic, but definitely within 20 years, we will be faced with the question that artificial intelligence is smart enough to vote. Something that we could trust. Something that we could say, well, it needs to have some type of rights, it needs to have some type of civil duty. Why not give robots voting powers? And this changes things a lot, because every single one of you probably has a cell phone, and if in 10 years or in 20 years that cell phone is smart as you, tied to the cloud, has a personality like Siri, but much more advanced, do we give those robots rights? Do we give them voting rights? It's a very complex question because it requires all these different types of ethics, and you have to realize that within 10 years, we might have upwards of 15, 20 billion different devices that could be smart enough, outstripping what it means to have humans on planet Earth, and do we all allow them to vote? These are the kinds of issues when you talk about a new government, you also have to consider. It's not just going to be humans anymore. I can tell you within 10 or 15 years, you've seen from Ben Goertzel's robot, we're going to have other entities here, other types of things. In fact, through genetic editing, we might even have different types of creatures that have some type of intelligence, and ourselves might become part cyborg connected to the cloud. Do some people's votes count more than once if they're 50 times smarter than the average human? These are some of the issues we might face. I have a neighbor who is 3D prints drones. And it's quite an astonishing thing, because you can 3D print a drone for basically about $1,000, and then you can go to Walmart or to your superstore and buy a single bullet, and you can arm your drone, and so very quickly you can cause a mass terrorist attack for about $30,000. Never in history has anyone had so much access. One credit card, can you go to a Super Bowl football stadium and attack a country and cause that much carnage? The point, though, is if we get into this robotic age where some things can vote, such as robots and things like that, you're going to have so many different types of entities that also have power, that also can be controlled. This is a shocking thing that with $30,000 you might be able to put together 100 different drones that you could take somewhere and control a small city. Well, this technology is not just coming, it's actually here already. It gives people different types of powers. Wars right now, for example, in the Congo and places like that, are fought with guns. But in the future, they might be fought in the air or through drones, shooting human beings, something like this. However it happens, though, drone armies might be one way to control different types of governments. And that could take us back to tyranny or back to dictatorships and things like that. It could also take us to different types of ways. The police might control us that way. However it happens, though, the government is going to be significantly altered by the fact that you can print out far more drones than there will be humans on planet Earth. And it's something that makes the world quite a different place. So I'm going to speak just a little bit about myself and how I kind of became a presidential candidate and why I got into it in the first place. Some of you may know that I wrote a novel called The Transhumanist Wager, which talks about transhumanism and really about life extension science. But a lot of people criticize it for being a political manifesto, because in the end of the day, it's about a guy who wants to live forever, and he will go to any extent to do that, including start a world war, form a brand new government where it's an authoritarianship. He basically holds a dictatorship. But, his justification is he wants to live indefinitely, and he will do anything to create a world where that ability to conquer death is his. Now, for better or worse, the book's very controversial, and let's just remind you, it is a novel. But it's how I began my futurist career. And so a lot of people ask me, why did I run for the presidential candidacy? Well, one of the reasons is I spent 4 years writing a political novel where the main character actually is involved deeply in politics. At some point, the main character returns the world back to a democratic form. But until that point, he did create a brand new government. And sometimes brand new governments are needed in order to free ourselves. Not something I would have said on the campaign trail. Sometimes brand new governments are needed to form the kinds of revolutions that we need in society to take back what was rightfully ours, to have a better society, one where maybe everybody has more of a voice and everybody has more prosperity. And I can tell you, with growing inequality rates right now around the world, and especially in America, there are many very angry people, which is exactly why Trump was voted in. One of the key questions, though, about governing is what actually would you be governing in the first place? And that goes down to who are you? What do you want? In my case, I want to live. And I would do anything to serve or to support a transhumanist community, a community that is dedicated to science, a community that is dedicated to technology, a community that is dedicated to changing the world for the better through our health. How far would I go? Well, I would probably do just about anything because those are the things that mean the most to me. But everybody has a different type of reason that they'll want to live, a different reason that they'd want a government. In fact, government is probably most determined by what you want out of your own life. And for many people, it's just wanting families. However, be careful. If we get to this indefinite lifespan thing, as a lot of us have been discussing, and you know you're going to live 200, 300,000 years, you may not want to have family right away. You may not want to get married. You may not want to have kids in the first few hundred years of your existence. So your government may be very different from what you want. I mean, if you knew you were going to live 1,000 years, would you have kids in the first 200? Well, that would determine why and how you have governments in the first place and why you need security in the first place to protect you. These are all kinds of things that, are important. It's also one of the reasons why I sort of dedicated my life to transhumanism. I had a very scary incident while working at National Geographic, and I almost stepped on a landmine in Vietnam. I was covering the demilitarized zone where they dig up bombs and sell the metal. It was that moment that I realized that no matter what happens, no matter what government we live under, we all face the threat of death. So therefore, in my opinion, the government's main purpose is to keep us from death. In fact, that was what my entire campaign promise was I wanted a government that would conquer death. That's the government that I want to give my full allegiance to. And that was my entire campaign promise, is take all the money we can and make it so that every American can live indefinitely. And, given the option, I would say make it so every human being on earth could have that option of living indefinitely. Of course, in America, where 75% of the nation is religious, Christian, and they believe in death, they want to die, they're deathists to some extent, it's very hard to talk to people about transhumanism or life extension. They say, well, so we want to meet Jesus in heaven, and I don't mind dying, I don't mind any of these things. Well, most people like myself are not interested in taking that chance. So I ran a very non-religious campaign, which was strictly based on trying to overcome death and not worry about cultural values or religious values. However, that didn't go very well with most Americans, because they are so religious. So when you're forming a government, of course, there have to be religious considerations as well as ethnic and heritage and cultural conditions. My campaign was known, at least what we think historically, the very first atheist campaign. The very first campaign where somebody in America was running on an entirely non-religious platform designed to try to promote secularism. And the reason that it would stand best to use a society that was entirely based on reason to promote science and technology. Because in the end of the day, science comes from the scientific method, and that scientific method is based on reason only. One of the great things that happened during my campaign, though, is once I formed my campaign, and at the same time I formed the Transhumanist Party, which at the time we didn't have a technology or science party in America or anywhere in the world, it was the very first one, it caught on like wildfire. And very quickly, within about I'd say 4 or 5 months, we had a dozen transhumanist parties around the world and a dozen other campaigns, whether they had candidates or not, running on the transhumanist platform, running specifically on a life extension platform. And now today, there are many different people doing different things politically with life extension and transhumanism and science and technology at the forefront. It doesn't need to be called Transhumanist Party. It can be the Science Party. It can be the Futurist Party. Whatever it was, we took it and we made it so that there was a platform to be had on running entirely on life extension, science, and technology. In fact, and so I began doing very interesting things. I think some novel ideas. Many of you may not know, but there's a software program called Second Life where you can actually immerse yourself as an avatar in the computer and live a second life. You can buy real estate, do all sorts of things. I was campaigning in Second Life. Naturally, that's where a lot of transhumanists hang out. I also had a robot on my campaign trail. It's not that much. My campaign was done on a budget. But it is 4 feet tall, and my kids loved it. And we went around in a giant bus, I'll get into a little bit later, that looked like a giant coffin that we were trying to promote the idea that we can overcome death in America through science. But real quickly, one of the things about the bus was in my opinion, there had never been much activism in science and technology, and you've been hearing a lot about science. What I wanted to do was not take just the scientists on the popular level, on the kind of technical level where they're talking to you about the, graphs and things like that, but I want to bring science to the people, where every day people want to use science and technology to speak about the kinds of things that matter to them, especially when it came to governing. So we designed a giant bus that looked just like a coffin, and we drove it for 4 months across the country, spreading what you call evangelism of transhumanism. And every single part of the trip, I had major media journalists with me on it. And so from very quickly, my campaign went from a kind of small campaign to a very large campaign where I was running 5th or 6th for about a year and a half in the US presidential elections and getting a ton of media. I think the bus got approximately 20 to 30 million views altogether. I'm not sure the population of South Korea, but 20 to 30 million views was a lot in America. And here I am delivering a transhumanist Bill of Rights, which kind of goes over some governing issues to the US Capitol, which we posted to the wall. In fact, I almost got arrested doing that, and one of the reasons I almost got arrested is because we have laws that don't really appreciate science and technology and longevity in America. They want to resist us because, of course, it's a Christian nation, and we're coming forward and saying, well, we can conquer death through putting our government resources into the longevity areas that are necessary. Well, it doesn't sit very well, but here I am posting to the US Capitol building the Transhumanist Bill of Rights. The main thing that I was asking for to redo our government in America was to take our money from nuclear weaponry, to take our money from bombs, to stop bombing Afghanistan and Iraq and places in the Middle East that most Americans will never go, and put that money into science. We wanted a war against cancer, we wanted a war against Alzheimer's, we wanted a war against death. That was, for me, the key point of my campaign. But along the way, we discovered many amazing things, too. Transhumanism can actually bring along a lot of different kind of disruptive technologies. One of them is direct digital democracy, where we could create a branch of government that can vote in the president or vote out the president beyond the US Constitution. If you got all 350 million people in America to agree to something like that, and you were able to get Congress to pass it, you could create what we would call a fourth branch of government. So direct digital democracy was one of our platforms at the Transhumanist Party. So was, quite controversially, this idea that I'm not a big fan of America over the 50-year life, span of years. Don't get me wrong, I loved America. I would love to have served as its president, but I don't believe that the world is going to remain a bunch of little countries as we move forward over the next 100 years. I think, despite Brexit, there will be some incentive to unite more like corporations, to unite together, to dissolve things, less ethnic fighting, less kind of conflict, less languages, less money, less different types of monies. It just makes sense to freestyle, to streamline a whole bunch of the different types of issues that we all have when we speak different languages and use hearing aids and things like that to help us. Why not make it one much larger nation under one democratic government? Well, and it could go beyond democracy too. We're going to go there right now. If in 20 years we were able to do things like upload our brains to computers, which is something that a lot of people are working on. We've had some success with telepathy, where thinking your thoughts and somebody else can hear it. If we upload consciousness into machines, does that change this way we would govern ourselves? Well, machines are governed by software, very different types of rules than we have, and yet people, I'm telling you, there are tens of millions of dollars being spent on various companies right now in Silicon Valley on uploading your consciousness, of uploading algorithms of how your brain works. So the idea is, could your government or could campaigns go straight to our minds? It's very possible. And would it be very different than what we're doing now? Sure, a virtual environment might be very different. We might not have ownership as we know it. We might not have genders as we know it. We might not have a lot of different things as you know. You don't have to worry about breathing and eating and all the major things of security that you would normally have to worry about in the real world, the things that the government would normally provide. A lot of this is going to be made available through artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is perhaps, next to genetic editing, in my opinion, the most important technology that's going to be arriving in the next 10 to 20 years. And it's going to change everything once we have an entity on planet Earth that can think quite a bit better than us, maybe 1,000 times better, maybe 1,000,000 times better than us. We're going to upload ourselves into machines, have virtual politicians, virtual avatars, where we are beyond the kinds of physical limits that sort of defined who we were for, hundreds and hundreds and millions of years. This is a very different type of environment when you start structuring what a government would look like. And some people have even suggested, and I had suggested this, in fact, one of the funny things in my campaign is I had offered to debate IBM's Watson, and the story went viral on Newsweek and everything else. Well, could a robot one day replace our government? Could we have an artificial intelligence that is smart enough to run the people as its best leader? Maybe we can program it to not be interested in its own agenda, but rather interested in a truly the people's agenda. Well, I would sign up for that if it was truly interested in the overall people's agenda. That sounds like a good kind of thing. But whatever is happening, we have to have new ways of looking at ourselves and new ways of looking at our government. And we can't be stuck with the old ways. It's transhumanism and technology that's going to be changing the face of how government operates in the near future. There's going to be technologies to help us. There's going to be technologies to perhaps abolish government entirely as we know it. Whatever happens, I think we should embrace that. It's not just the future, it's going to make our world better. Thank you so much.
And now to conclude the presentation,